Darkness gathers over Constantinople. Imagine standing on the ancient walls as dawn breaks. But instead of the usual city bustle, you see an endless ocean of tents, banners, and soldiers chanting in unison. 80,000 Ottomans, their voices rolling like thunder, their prayers shaking your soul. This is not just an army, it is a storm designed to crush both stone and spirit. Before a cannonball is even fired, you feel the weight of doom. And if you want to uncover every cruel truth of this forgotten conquest, subscribe now, because this is a descent into history's most terrifying theater. The year is 1453, and Constantinople is more than a city. It is the heart of an empire, the symbol of Rome's 1,000-year survival. Emperor Constantine XI stands defiant with barely 7,000 defenders at his side. He knows the odds, yet he clings to hope. Across the battlefield, the 21-year-old Sultan Mehmed II is already reshaping history. He understands something chilling: fear travels faster than arrows, and terror lasts longer than steel. To prove his power, Mehmed unveils a monster forged in bronze. Orban's great cannon, 27 feet long, firing stone balls heavier than horses. Its roar shakes the earth, and its smoke blots out the morning sun. The Byzantines watch helplessly as the Ottoman engineers test-fire the weapon, the ground trembling beneath their feet. One chronicler wrote that the sound could be heard 15 miles away, like the heavens themselves splitting open. But the cannon is not just a weapon, it is theater. The Ottomans deliberately stage their display within sight of the walls, reminding every citizen inside, this city will fall and we will be the ones to bury it. Mothers hush their children, priests whisper prayers, yet the thunder of metal drowns out all comfort. Constantinople becomes a prison of dread, each sunrise a countdown to annihilation. And the cruelty does not stop with noise. When Byzantine ships dared to break the blockade, captured sailors were dragged ashore and impaled where all could see. Families watched their sons writhe for days, skewered alive as the smell of roasting Ottoman feasts drifted over the walls. Hunger gnawed the defenders while their enemies dined lavishly within sight. It was not simply war, it was psychological torture. Inside the city, rations dwindled. Leather was boiled into soup, horses were slaughtered for scraps of meat. Meanwhile, outside, the Ottomans roasted lamb and bread. The aromas seeped through the air, a cruel reminder of the imbalance. Soldiers on the walls clenched their teeth, their stomachs twisting, forced to smell abundance while tasting despair. This was Mehmed's true genius. He starved their will before he starved their bodies. As May dragged on, Constantinople's spirit cracked. Priests tried to inspire courage with sermons of divine protection, but whispers of betrayal spread. Some wondered if God had abandoned the city. Others feared that surrender would only mean slavery or death. The defenders no longer fought to win, they fought to delay the inevitable. And all the while, Ottoman cruelty sharpened its edge. The final assault came at dawn on May 29th. Cannons thundered, and the ancient Theodosian walls, which had stood for centuries, finally yielded. Dust choked the air as Ottoman soldiers poured in. The screams of the dying echoed through narrow streets. The city, once the jewel of Christendom, became a battlefield, where every home, every church, every alley was stained with blood. Emperor Constantine fought with his men sword in hand. Chroniclers wrote of him vanishing into the chaos, his body never recovered. Some say his head was placed on a spear, others insist he was buried secretly by his followers. The truth is lost, swallowed by the roar of battle. The last emperor of Byzantium disappeared, and with him the final light of Rome's 1,000-year legacy. By midday, the massacre turned systematic. The Ottomans divided the survivors with chilling efficiency. Young women and children were chained for the slave markets. Men were slaughtered or driven into forced labor. The elderly were deemed useless and cut down without mercy. Families were ripped apart in moments. Children as young as 8 were branded with hot irons to mark their new ownership. Cruelty had become an assembly line, a machine fueled by human lives. The heart of the city, The Hagia Sophia, once the grandest church in Christendom, became the final refuge for nearly 3,000 desperate civilians. Mothers clutched their infants, old men prayed aloud, and children cried as the heavy doors shut. They believed sanctuary would save them. But for Mehmed, even the sacred was expendable. He had already suspended Islamic laws that normally protected holy sites. What followed would stain the cathedral forever. Ottoman cavalry burst through the doors, hooves echoing on the marble floors. Civilians screamed as steel clashed against stone. The conquerors raised their banners inside the Hagia Sophia not to honor its sanctity, but to desecrate it. The first Islamic prayer was performed above pools of Christian blood. The air stank of iron and smoke. History was rewritten in a single service, and no prayer could undo it. Outside, impalement forests rose across Constantinople. Victims were skewered and displayed in public squares, their bodies arranged like grotesque warnings. Skilled executioners avoided vital organs, keeping victims alive for days. The cries pierced through the air, mingling with the sound of Ottoman drums. Nobles, even in death, were granted a cruel privilege, golden stakes, a twisted honor that mocked their lineage. To the Ottomans, cruelty was a brand. Impalement was not only punishment, it was advertisement. "This could be you," the spectacle screamed to every corner of Europe. Merchants, priests, and prisoners alike became living billboards of terror. Mehmed did not need messengers. The tortured bodies spoke louder than any proclamation. Then came the devshirm. Boys between 8 and 18 were lined up, inspected like livestock. Parents pleaded, begged, and clawed at soldiers' boots, but nothing stopped the process. Children were renamed, converted, and forbidden to speak their native tongues. Some were castrated for harem service, most dying from the procedure. Those who survived became Janissary soldiers trained to kill their own people in future wars. Imagine the heartbreak of a father watching his son taken away, the boy's screams fading into the distance. Mothers fainted in grief. Families were erased in an instant. To Mehmed, this was efficiency. To the victims, it was the end of love, lineage, and identity. The devshirme was not just kidnapping, it was the weaponization of childhood. And while the boys were transformed into warriors, women faced 3 days of sanctioned violation. Soldiers dragged daughters, sisters, and wives into the night, laughing as they claimed their spoils. This reward was a policy, not chaos. It humiliated noble families, destroyed community bonds, and ensured that children born of violence belonged to neither culture. Generations carried the scars of those nights. One of the most devastating cruelties was forcing children to desecrate their own faith. Small hands were guided to trample on crosses, spit on icons, and recite prayers they barely understood, all while their parents were forced to watch. The sight of innocence corrupted in the name of conquest broke more spirits than swords ever could. Eyewitnesses documented everything. The chronicler Ducas described the Hagia Sophia massacre. The blood of the innocent flowed like water, and the screams of women and children echoed for 3 days. He counted 400 children slaughtered in the cathedral alone. Each number carried the weight of a soul silenced forever. Other accounts were disturbingly detached. Leonico Chalcocondyles recorded deaths and enslavements with the coldness of a ledger. Thousands killed, thousands sold, thousands vanished. The horror became statistics, rows of suffering reduced to ink. His tone was unemotional, but perhaps that made it worse. It showed how normalized atrocity had become, even to those who watched. Ottoman chroniclers told a different story. Tursun Beg framed the massacres as sacred duty, a purifying flame meant to cleanse the city of corruption. He wrote of rivers of blood with the same calm used for harvest reports, as if the killing were administrative housekeeping. To him, Constantinople did not fall. It was washed, reset, and prepared for a new order under heaven's approval. Ashik Pashazadeh added the chilling logistics. The Janissaries took the walls. The Sipahis seized the people, the Akinci stripped the wealth, each unit assigned a task as neatly as rolls on an assembly line. terror, plunder, enslavement, all scheduled, all measured. A conquest run like a corporation where human beings were inventory and fear was the operating system. A Venetian merchant, Niccolò Barbaro, captured Europe's disbelief. They kill in God's name, with the fervor we reserve for prayer. His words traveled through ports and courts, turning Constantinople into a cautionary tale. He described the silence after screams, the way streets seemed to hold their breath as if the stones themselves had learned fear. Some Greeks who served Mehmed after the fall tried to rationalize the nightmare. Critobulus wrote of the Sultan's mercy, claiming swift death spared longer suffering. It reads like a hostage note to posterity, a mind trying to survive by renaming cruelty as benevolence. When power defines the vocabulary, truth limps behind it bleeding. Why did this cruelty work so devastatingly well? Three forces braided into a whip: religious sanction, political calculation, and economic appetite. Faith promised paradise for conquest. Strategy demanded a spectacular example to paralyze future resistance, and profit required bodies, hands to fight, to build, to serve. The result was not chaos, but choreography. Compared to other medieval catastrophes, the Ottoman method was uniquely composite. The Mongols had annihilating power. The Crusaders had religious fury, but Mehmed's machine fused creed, plan, and profit with bureaucratic precision. It was horror with paperwork, devotion with schedules, and plunder with receipts. The city did not merely lose, it was processed. News of the fall rippled across Europe like a cold front. In Rome, whispers hardened into proclamations that the gates of hell had opened in the east. Italian city-states rushed to redesign fortifications, sketching angular bastions to resist cannon fire. Medieval walls, once proud ribs of cities, were suddenly obsolete, like armor in the age of gunpowder thunder. Military doctrine shifted overnight. If walls could be broken, wills must be broken faster. Armies across the continent studied Ottoman shock tactics and terrifyingly copied parts of them. Books on siegecraft now included chapters on spectacle and dread. Commanders learned to weaponize the rumor mill to make surrender feel rational before the first breach. Inside the conquered city, erasure moved at astonishing speed. Churches became mosques, frescoes were plastered over altars converted to pulpits. Greek names receded as Turkish ones arrived like a tide. Markets reopened, but the language of trade had changed. The rhythms of prayer, the calendar of feasts, the meaning of dawn and dusk, all reprogrammed within a generation. The loss of manuscripts was an amputation of memory. Scribes fled, libraries smoldered, and shelves that once groaned with ancient voices stood bare. Imagine a civilization waking to find its mirrors gone. What could no longer be read could no longer be remembered, and what could not be remembered could be denied. That, too, was a kind of conquest silence enthroned where wisdom once spoke. The psychological impact stretched far beyond the Bosporus. In taverns and cathedrals, Europeans repeated tales of golden stakes, child soldiers, and violated sanctuaries. The phrase, "the terrible Turk," entered the cultural bloodstream, an image fed by the screams of 1453. For centuries, plays, sermons, and political speeches would invoke it to stir fear, uniting fractured nations under the shadow of Ottoman cruelty. In the Islamic world, however, the story gleamed as triumph. Mehmed II was hailed as the ultimate Ghazi, the warrior who succeeded where 8 centuries of predecessors had failed. For poets and scholars under his reign, the rivers of blood were not shame, but proof of divine favor. The same acts Europe called atrocities became in Ottoman memory sacraments of destiny fulfilled. This dual memory glory for one, trauma for another, ensured the conquest lived longer than the victims. For the Christians who lost children to the slave markets, each scar was a reminder. For the Ottomans who raised minarets over broken domes, each prayer was a victory chant. History's cruelty lies not only in the acts themselves, but in the way they are remembered. As the years passed, Constantinople ceased to exist in more than name. Istanbul emerged not slowly, but with brutal suddenness. Within a single lifetime, 1,000 years of Byzantine culture dissolved. What grandmothers whispered in Greek, grandchildren repeated in Turkish. What ancestors had prayed beneath mosaics, descendants repeated beneath painted ceilings of another creed. The efficiency of this transformation was shocking. Chroniclers noted that it took the Ottomans less time to erase Byzantine identity than it took most noblemen to renovate a hall. 1,000 years of memory reduced to rubble plaster and silence in less than a generation. Speed itself was cruelty, denying people the chance to grieve before replacing their world. Yet cruelty was not always loud. Sometimes it was the quiet extinguishing of futures. Scholars who carried rare texts fled or were enslaved. Works of classical minds existing nowhere else vanished in flames. To lose a library is to lose a language of thought. To burn a manuscript is to amputate humanity's collective imagination. The bonfires of 1453 did not just consume parchment, they consumed possibilities. Europe felt the wound like phantom pain. The Renaissance, fueled by Greek manuscripts that survived elsewhere, was a strange paradox, revival born from loss. Every rediscovered text was a reminder of what had been lost forever in the inferno of Constantinople. Pain and progress walked hand in hand, shadows lengthening across the continent. Mehmed's cruelty was not without purpose. By staging horror so theatrically, he ensured neighboring states trembled at the mere whisper of Ottoman approach. Why fight when surrender seemed merciful compared to forests of impaled nobles or 3 days of unrestrained violation? The brutality of Constantinople became both shield and spear, a story used to conquer without lifting a sword. This reputation bought the Ottomans decades of momentum. Cities capitulated more quickly, armies hesitated longer, and kings debated whether their crowns were worth their children's lives. Terror is cheap, effective, and contagious. Mehmed knew it. His successors perfected it. The fall of Constantinople was not the end of cruelty, it was the prototype of its mass production. The chronicles of 1453 remind us that civilization can end not only with collapse but with conquest, carefully scripted as theater. Every impalement, every desecrated altar, every abducted child was a performance with an audience. And the audience was not only those who lived it, but those who would hear of it for centuries. Cruelty became the curtain and history, the stage. But behind the curtain of glory and horror lay a cold economic engine. The empire thrived on slaves. Constantinople was not just a conquest, it was a harvest. Every man, woman, and child was assessed for value, strong backs for labor, delicate faces for harems, nimble youths for janissary training. The city became a ledger written in blood, each life a number in Mehmed's balance sheet. Children taken into the Janissary Corps underwent not just physical training but total identity erasure. They were forced to forget their families, their languages, their prayers. What was once Andreas became Ali. What was once Nikolaos became Mustafa. In stripping away the past, Mehmed built soldiers loyal not to blood but to the state. Cruelty here was not rage, it was policy. The conversion of the Hagia Sophia symbolized this policy most starkly. Within days of the conquest, the mosaics of saints were plastered over. The echoes of hymns were replaced by the call to prayer. For Christians, it was the profaning of their holiest temple. For Ottomans, it was the crowning jewel of Islam's advance. One building, two memories, one wound carved into eternity. Even in the chaos, the cruelty had layers. Ordinary civilians faced immediate death or enslavement, but the nobility were humiliated with precision. They were paraded, mocked, and made examples of living trophies of Ottoman dominance. Their blood was valuable not for its life, but for the message it carried. No title, no crown, no empire could shield you. Accounts from survivors describe the silence after the first days of slaughter. Streets lined with corpses, doors broken from their hinges, altars smeared with blood. The smell of rot clung to the city like a second skin. Dogs and crows fed openly undisturbed, while the living stumbled past with hollow eyes. Silence, more than screams, told the story of Constantinople's fall. And yet, amid this devastation, Mehmed declared himself the heir not only of Ottoman sultans, but of Roman emperors. By conquering Constantinople, he claimed Caesar's mantle. It was not just a city he seized, but the symbolism of empire itself. Cruelty was his coronation, the blood of Byzantium his crown. The psychological warfare did not end with the conquest. Messengers carried tales across Europe, forests of impaled bodies, children turned into soldiers, churches turned into stables. Each retelling magnified the terror, ensuring that even those untouched by Ottoman swords still felt the cut of their reputation. Fear was a contagion Mehmed spread with precision. Diplomats recorded the debates in royal courts. Should they resist, or was resistance suicide? Some leaders argued for surrender before the Ottomans even marched. Others built new alliances united not by friendship, but by dread. The fall of Constantinople had redrawn the map of courage itself, where once walls inspired defiance, now they reminded rulers of futility. And so cruelty transcended its victims. It reshaped architecture, politics, and theology. New fortresses rose with angled bastions, thicker walls, deeper moats, all designed to withstand Ottoman cannons. Priests preached not only salvation, but vigilance, warning that the sins of Constantinople's fall might repeat if faith wavered. Every sermon became a shadow of 1453. For the people enslaved, the story did not end with conquest. Chains carried them across seas, markets, and generations. Families vanished into the machinery of empire, their names lost, but their labor enduring. Their suffering was not a chapter, it was the ink with which new Ottoman history was written. The cruelty of 1453 did not end in a day. It echoed in every field plowed, every wall built, every battle fought with stolen hands. Among the most haunting legacies was the silence of children forced into the Janissary ranks. Some resisted and were beaten, others adapted and rose in power, but all carried the fracture of identity stolen. They marched under new flags, wielded new weapons, and spoke new prayers, yet deep inside fragments of old lullabies and memories of lost mothers gnawed like ghosts. This was cruelty measured not in years but in lifetimes. Religious zeal fueled every act of brutality. To Ottoman soldiers, this was jihad, a holy war that sanctified every impalement, every abduction, every desecrated altar. Paradise was promised as reward, and mercy was rebranded as betrayal of faith. When belief and violence intertwined, swords grew sharper, and hesitation died. The conquest became not only political, but cosmic, painted as a battle between heaven and corruption. To Europe, this was incomprehensible. Medieval warfare had always been brutal, but there were limits, customs, gestures of mercy. The Ottoman storm swept those boundaries aside. Niccolò Barbaro described it bluntly. They killed in God's name with the enthusiasm of prayer. That fusion of devotion and death horrified Europe in a way numbers alone could not. Survivors carried scars deeper than wounds. Some women bore children conceived in violation their very existence, a reminder of terror. Some boys taken as slaves returned decades later as janissaries facing their own kin across battlefields. Fathers recognized sons only by their eyes before swords struck. The conquest did not just kill it, rewrote bloodlines, shattered continuity, and fractured families across generations. In villages far from the city, peasants whispered of Constantinople's fall like a cautionary myth. Parents warned children to pray to remain faithful or risk the fate of those devoured by the terrible Turks. Fear became folklore retold at hearths as both lesson and nightmare. In time, these whispers hardened into the cultural memory that would shape European identity for centuries. But cruelty was not without calculation. Mehmed's conquest ensured trade routes flowed into Ottoman hands, wealth poured into coffers, and Constantinople became Istanbul, the beating heart of a new empire. The slaughter was not madness, but method, and its efficiency terrified as much as its blood. What Europe saw as barbarity, Mehmed wielded as strategy. Even centuries later, echoes of 1453 lingered. European architecture evolved in direct response. Castles became star forts designed to deflect cannonballs. Cities prepared for sieges they prayed would never come. The ghost of Constantinople haunted blueprints and battle plans alike. Its fall taught that no wall, no matter how ancient, could withstand the march of modern cruelty. Theologians, too, carried the memory. Sermons invoked Constantinople as proof of divine wrath or human weakness. Some claimed the city fell because of sin, others because of betrayal, but all agreed it was a lesson to never be complacent. Faith became militant, fear sanctified, and from pulpits across Europe, Constantinople's screams were translated into warnings from God. In the Islamic world, poets glorified the same acts. Verses described the fall as a sunrise after centuries of darkness. They praised Mehmed as a second Alexander, a conqueror chosen by heaven. The same massacres Dukas called rivers of blood were reframed as rivers of purification. This clash of narratives ensured that memory itself was contested ground. The truth, however, lies in the testimonies of the broken. A mother searching for a child torn from her arms, a priest silenced before his altar, a soldier starving. As the scent of feasts taunted him, these voices scattered across chronicles remind us that history is not just empires and strategies, but human suffering crystallized in ink. Their pain is the echo we still hear. As the century turned, the memory of Constantinople's fall did not fade, it calcified. European rulers invoked it whenever they needed unity, whispering, "Remember the city of blood." Ottoman rulers invoked it to inspire ambition, declaring, "We are the heirs of empire." One moment in 1453 became two mirrors reflecting triumph to one side and terror to the other. Generations born after the conquest still carried its weight. In European plays and ballads, the Turk was always the villain, a shadowed figure of cruelty whose scimitar gleamed red. In Ottoman courts, Mehmed was celebrated in mosaics and manuscripts as the destined conqueror. Children learned to cheer his name even as other children across seas feared it. And yet beneath the banners of glory and the sermons of fear, the silence of the victims remained the most haunting truth. Thousands of nameless men, women, and children vanished into slavery. Their voices lost, their stories drowned by the grand narratives of empire. They remind us that cruelty's sharpest blade is forgetfulness. For historians, the fall of Constantinople stands as the meeting point of medieval and modern. Cannons shattered walls, bureaucracy organized conquest, faith fueled brutality. It was not the chaos of barbarians, but the order of a system. The cruelty of 1453 was not incidental. It was engineered. That, perhaps, is the most frightening revelation. If Mongols embodied raw destruction, and Crusaders embodied religious fury, the Ottomans embodied a fusion belief strategy, profit, woven into one. It was cruelty industrialized before industry, terror rehearsed like theater before theater existed. Constantinople was both stage and victim, its ruin a performance meant to be remembered. Europe's reaction reshaped its destiny. Renaissance thinkers, spurred by the fear of Ottoman dominance, sought new knowledge, new maps, new weapons. Some argue that the discovery of the New World was in part a ripple from 1453, an attempt to bypass Ottoman-controlled trade. Thus, from cruelty sprouted exploration, proof that history's wounds often bear paradoxical fruit. But for those who lived it, paradox was no comfort. Survivors remembered screams echoing in Hagia Sophia for 3 days, the stench of burning flesh, the silence of children forced to spit on their faith. For them, the fall was not a turning point of history. It was the end of the world they knew. Their tears, not maps, marked the truest borders. The cruelty of 1453 also warns us of something timeless. When ideology, ambition, and profit align, atrocities multiply. Mehmed needed legitimacy. His soldiers needed reward. His empire needed labor. All three were purchased with blood. That formula has reappeared across centuries, dressed in different banners, but echoing the same rhythm of horror. Today, the Hagia Sophia still stands a monument layered with contradictions. Tourists walk beneath its dome, cameras flashing where once mothers wept. Some see beauty, others hear echoes. The stones remember both hymn and prayer, both blessing and scream. It is proof that buildings survive longer than the truths they contain, and that cruelty can be plastered over, but not erased. And so, as we close this descent into Constantinople's fall, one lesson lingers: civilization is fragile. Empires that last 1,000 years can vanish in a single day when cruelty is organized, sanctified, and unleashed. The question that remains is not whether cruelty shaped the past, it did, but whether we in our own age are blind to the cruelties being rehearsed around us now. Like, share, and comment your thoughts for History Whispers, and only by listening can we resist repeating its darkest chapters.